Welcome back. When tragedy strikes, most people find themselves doing anything they can to support those in need. After the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, many charitable organizations stepped forward, but if you're not careful, you may run into scams. President and CEO of Charity Navigator Michael Thatcher joins me to discuss ways to ensure your donations don't end up in the wrong hands. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm happy to help out.
Now, just when we're thinking overall, what makes people so vulnerable to scams in regards to charity?
I think the key issue with any kind of charitable giving is that giving starts from the heart. Something happens in the world, or something happens to you or your family, and you're grabbed by the heart at that moment. There's a cause that's really called you. You either get really angry about it, you get really upset about it, you want to do something about it. And when that happens, we're emotionally triggered, and that does make us vulnerable. So we really want people to, follow that emotional link and then use your head to actually not get scammed and make a real difference in the world.
Now, according to the FBI, these scams can happen at any time, but they are especially prevalent after high profile disasters like what we saw in Turkey and Syria. Can you just tell me about the charitable responses you saw in regard to Turkey and Syria?
Sure. So at Charity Navigator, what we try and make it easier for folks by actually creating a curated list of highly rated organizations that have sort of feet on the street that are doing part of the relief. They let your donation be dedicated to the actual relief effort, and they are highly rated, which means in many cases they have experience in the disaster cleanup and addressing some of the issues that come up.
Now, what are some of the different forms of charity fraud?
There are a lot of different forms, and actually one of the trickiest ones is what I would call spoofing or look-alike charities. So someone will create an entity or even just a fake website. It's not a fake website, it's a real website, but using a name of an organization that sounds really familiar and isn't actually that organization. So it's just outright fraudulent lying. Another form of fraud would be to solicit money for a stated purpose, but then use it for something entirely different. Or that sometimes you have fraud in the sense of, I actually have a legitimate charity, but most of the money is going to individual fundraisers or other entities, and it's not actually going to the purpose in question.
Now, that last point that you touched on, I think is super important because you're mentioning that the charity could be, a legitimate, reputable charity, but they're using, I think this is why sometimes, I guess, when people say percentages or, certain things and it kind of tricks people. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, and I think there's part of what I'm talking about is the how much money goes to fundraising or to administrative costs or to the actual program or the intervention that the organization works on. These measures are kind of basic guidelines. They're not necessarily telling you that the organization's making an impact. But if 90% of your dollar is going to paying for fundraisers, that's a problem, right? That's too much money going to anything but the cause. But ultimately, when it gets to looking at the difference that a charity makes in the world, you want to know and you want to hear the impact that they're making. And that isn't necessarily a financial ratio.
I also think it's important to touch on that because I think a lot of people caught on to, major charity networks that were doing similar things to that, and it kind of discouraged a lot of people from donating or kind of, just helping out a lot of these charities because they felt like, okay, my money isn't actually going to the people in need. It's going to maybe buying T-shirts to spread awareness or, do different things. Can you just talk about what you would say to those people who maybe felt a little bit discouraged, from doing charities because of what you're talking about right now?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that Charity Navigator has tried to do with our ratings is we look at four key areas, and these areas really help you understand and ultimately build trust between you and the organization you seek to support. And we're looking for strong leadership, the ability to be adaptable. We're looking for what we call accountability in finance. Are you transparent with your finances? Do you tell me how you spend your money? And do you actually have enough money to be around in case we hit some rainy days? We look at culture and community. So how do you engage with the community that you're supporting? How do you actually work with your own employees from more of a DEI perspective? And then finally, and most importantly, what are the impact and results that you're creating as an organization? So that framework is really whether we have the ratings or whether you internalize that and use that as a set of questions to ask an organization that you're seeking to support. It helps establish trust and lets you know that they are actually making a difference in the world in a way that you care.
Now, a lot of organizations, especially, charities, they operate online. This is a
Mhm.
very easy place to get scammed. A lot of scamming these days happen online. What can donors do to just make sure that they're not falling for online scams?
So similar to any kind of, the phishing emails, and you're getting solicitations where you see the actual address may say the name of an entity, but then you look afterwards and it's all kinds of numbers and garbled. It's not the actual address. It's a spoofed address. Be careful of that. I think the other thing to really always rely on independent sources. So just doing a simple Google search on an organization should you bring you to their actual site, not the spoof site. And then finally, Charity Navigator exists as a free service to enable you to do that sort of layer of protection. And one thing about our giving basket, if you choose to give to a charity through our platform, we won't let you give to a fake charity. And we're also, again, we're doing this for free. We don't charge for this. We're really trying to ultimately help giving be trustworthy.
Can you expand on the giving basket? I think it sounds really interesting. Can you just tell everybody, what that is and, what happens when they actually decide to partake in that?
Absolutely. So just real brief, Charity Navigator rates about 200,000 organizations annually. We also have information on all the legitimate, let's say legally registered charities in the United States. These are what we call 501c3 organizations. And on our website that has this information, there's also ability to just think of like any kind of an e-commerce situation where you pick a charity that you want, you put it in your giving basket, you then go through a checkout process, and we'll process your credit card information, and then the money gets distributed directly to that organization. So the giving basket just facilitates that transaction in actually up to 100. I don't think we see too many people giving to 100 organizations though.
That's amazing. I like that because it makes people feel a little bit more secure,
Yep.
when they're doing that process. So that's amazing. Speaking of, just donating, I know that, I want to ask, can a requested form of payment alert donors to whether or not they're being scammed? So if somebody's asking, for gift cards or, oh, can you donate through Cash App? Is that a way that they could be getting scammed?
I think some where I would be leery, you ought to be able to dictate how you're going to give. In other words, it's your money, right? And if someone says, well, can you go out and buy these gift cards for me? Or do you mind give me your banking? That's a huge red flag. Anybody asks you for any kind of personal information around your banking, I would turn around and walk the other way rather quickly. So you should control how the transaction happens. Particularly, any legitimate nonprofit's going to have a multitude of ways that you can give to them, and generally, working through your credit card, writing a check. Venmo is also increasingly something that charities are receiving payments from, but don't ever be pushed into giving in any specific format. That to me is already a red flag that someone is being coercive in their approach, and that's not okay.
Now, I want to talk about, obviously donating online is a huge way, to support people, but, people also support, by like giving food, actual food, or giving their time. Can you just talk about donating and just supporting those in need by physical, actual work?
So there are a couple of things. For example, in the situation of Turkey right now and Syria with the earthquake recovery efforts, unless you're actually an experienced uh, recovery, I'm not sure what the right word is, but unless you have experience in disaster recovery, being a volunteer right now might be difficult. And actually, a lot of the organizations right now, they need resources to pay professionals to come in and do that sort of first line support. There's a way of there is a need for volunteering, and there are a couple of different ways that you can find volunteer efforts. What's interesting, since the global pandemic, there's a lot more that you can do online. We've got on Charity Navigator, we have a connection through Golden Volunteer, which helps you localize the volunteering opportunities based on your zip code, and then find an organization that helps you there. The last point I'll make is donating goods. Be careful donating goods in the sense that because you have something extra doesn't mean it's necessarily needed by an organization. Make sure they need what you're giving, and then try and find a connection that way, because the donating of goods can often be uh, not necessarily useful, particularly with regard to a disaster recovery effort.
Now, what should people do if they realize that they have become a victim of a specific charity scam?
I think there are a couple different avenues for that one can go. Is go to your state consumer protection office. You can also go to, and that would be also the attorney general of your state. And then also there's, I think it's tips.fbi.gov will also get you to directly to the FBI, where you can file a complaint and say you've been scammed.
Now, what would you do to encourage people? I know sometimes when it comes to alerting, especially if you're talking FBI or, people in high places, people can sometimes feel a little bit nervous or scared to come forward. What would you say to somebody who's feeling, a little bit apprehensive about that?
I think when it's hard when we've been taken advantage of, and there's hurt, there's embarrassment, there's anger. But ultimately, the FBI is there to help you maybe recover what you've lost. But also, it's really important to call these things out, because it stops the perpetrator from stealing from someone else. And
Right.
so you're doing good to the world and for the world by reporting on when you've been taken advantage of in a charity scam. We There's so much good that goes into the nonprofit sector, and there really is a small number of bad players in there. We need to take action to reduce that number even more and make it go away.
All right. Michael, thank you so much for joining me, and having this discussion.
Thank you, and thanks again.
To learn more about how to avoid charity scams, please go to Charity Navigator's website at www.charitynavigator.org or follow them on social media at CharityNav. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Open right after this.